Hi, this is T with TeaQuilts, and today we're going to sew the stack and whack blocks units together. And I do have a dilemma with this because I'm planning to do a one block wonder where you don't really sew the complete block together. So I'm just going to show you some parts and then just tell you what you would do after that. And then I do have a little mini quilt that I can show you how it's put together. So let's get started. So here are my triangles that I cut out of the fabric in the previous video in part 3 of the Stack and Wax series, and I was able to get 33 of these larger triangles. And remember, I was doing some additional cutting for you so that we could see what a 4-stack posy would look like, a 4-patch posy would look like. And I have 3 of these that I cut, and these are 3.5-inch squares. And then I did cut a few of the 3-inch triangles, and so these are those half units that I haven't sewn completely together yet. And so I am going, oh, I almost forgot. And in addition, I have like 15 of these little 1.5-inch squares that I cut. So I am able to make 15 of these little tiny blocks, like so. That will be little stack and whack blocks or 4-stack posy blocks as well. So I'm going to start with the triangles because that's probably what everybody is more interested in. So remember, we always had the pin at the bottom of our triangle. And again, like I said in part 3, if you are comfortable with sewing bias seams and don't do any stretching, a 60-degree triangle can be used on any of its sides. So if you want to do a different design, that's perfectly okay. So if you want to see what your block is going to look like before you sew it together, you just lay out the triangle. And if you don't like it and you're not afraid of having bias edges on the outside of your block, you're more than welcome to transfer it to a different side by changing you're more than welcome to change it to another side by just rotating every triangle 1/3 of a turn. So the first thing we want to do is sew this unit together. You would think to sew these into 3 pairs, but that's not how it works. So if I have a pair right here, and then I have this as a pair, I then want to add 1 onto each of the pair so that I end up with half of a block. So let's sew 2 pairs together. And I'm using a 1/4-inch seam as usual for standard quilt making. And at this point, I'm just going to use my wooden iron again and press these seams open. And the reason why we're pressing these seams open is because there's going to be a lot of seams coming together in the center, and we want to make sure that it is as flat as possible. So I'm going to flat iron it with my wooden iron on the back and the front, and then I'm just going to take 1 additional triangle and sew it to the other side. Now what's pretty cool is when I go to sew the other triangle on, I have these dog ears hanging out, so that also helps me to line up my tip So I just put my dog ear there and then continue to sew. And this is the other half of that unit. So I'm going to use my iron and press it open as well. And I'm going to add my last triangle onto this unit. Again, using that dog ear to line them up. So you definitely do not want to cut the dog ears off of your block. You can after it's completely sewn, but definitely not before you sew it. That little extra really helps. Now, I am actually not going to be sewing these units together. So what I'm going to do is going to jump to one of the 3-inch units that I have already sewn together, and I'll show you how they actually go together from there. So I'll go ahead and take one of these off just to show you that you still go ahead and press that seam open. And at this point, if you wanted to go to your ironing surface, you could go ahead and press this flat. You don't want to be ironing, you just want to lift and press, because you will ruin the bias edges that are running along this seam line. But I'm okay with what I have, so I'm not going to press anything. So that will be sufficient for me. But I'm going to actually put this one to the side. And I'm going to show you on a different block how I would sew these two units together and make my actual hexagon for the stack and whack block. So how we pin is we have a little triangle section here. And what I want to do, the little triangle section here, and where that triangle is where all 3 of these fabrics meet, plus you have a 1/4 inch seam. So I actually want to turn to the back, and on the back I actually have the seam line running across in my seam allowance from when I sew one of the triangle together. I actually want to put my pin in the seam allowance at that line, and when I turn it to the front, it should be right at the top of the triangle. So then I take my other unit and stick it into the triangle at that point at the top. And if you're having difficulty seeing, you can stick it in and then check on the back to see if you're lining up with the line. And I am, so I'm okay. You also have this dog ear here, but I still like to do my pin check because my sewing is more accurate if I want my center to match up than the dog ear at this point. So I will stick that pin in just to hold it, and then I'm going to put in 2 pins on the opposite side of that. And now I can pull out my center pin. I no longer need it. And then I just go ahead and do regular 1/4 inch seam across. When I get to the pin, I just take it out a stitch or 2 before the pin. Now I've sewn my seam, and what I want to do now is press the entire seam open. And you can also check in the middle to see if your things are lining up, and I think they are. So we're gonna go ahead and use my wooden iron, but I will go ahead at this point and go to my large iron and press this seam completely open. Just make sure when you're working with your stack and whack blocks that you are not stretching them. So here's one of my block units. Now after you make a lot of these blocks, you have to put it together, and the way that you put this together is you will take whatever background fabric or star points fabric you want to use. You will cut the same exact height as the rows you cut for your stack and whack. So with these smaller blocks, I cut 3-inch strips and then cut triangles from the 3-inch strip. Then you would cut a 3-inch strip of your points and background fabric. So let me show you on a little miniature quilt that I made. And what you're looking at is, this is your hexagon here. So you have your hexagon, and what you're going to do is your hexagon, you're going to actually put a star point here and a star point here. So you're actually going to put one on your bottom left corner and one on your upper right corner. Each hexagon gets one triangle in the lower left corner, one in the upper right. And it doesn't really matter where you start. It's just that when you put the first one on, that's going to be your left, and then you've got to get your right. So then once you have this hexagon with the star points, so you've got this star point and this star point, and you do that for every block going down, and then you just sew these blocks together right here, matching this seam. This star point, so I've sewn this star point in that one, and then this block has this one and that one. I'm actually sewing this line together as I'm sewing my rows. I really hope you can see what I'm talking about here. You're actually sewing this seam line here, and you would do that all the way out. What happens is when you get to the end of the line, you actually, this has been sewn onto this block, so it's already there, and we're only looking at this line right here. So this is all we're looking at. We've sewn this on and this on, but where did this come from? I'm just going to cover my hand up. There is a seam right here where you need to add an extra star point right here in this pink, and then in this white, this is 2 half star points. One are up on the top row and one is on the bottom row, and I've got my hand covering it. It's right on the side of the pink, but if I'm on this other side, I hope you can see that this is what we're trying to piece together in order to finish off this diagonal on the end of the short lines. I mean, on the end of the long lines. On the end of the short lines, you're going to need all of this area right here. So you'll be needing all of this pieced. So it's like a half. If you think of this as a line drawn down the middle, you're going to need 1 pink star point on the top, 2 of your background triangles, and then you have 1 half of a triangle, and then on the bottom you just have 2 whites with a half, 2 full white triangles, and then 1 half. I hope that makes sense. If not, you can also refer to Bethany's Reynolds Stack and Whack book. It's very clear on how you put these projects together. I just don't want to go any further because I know people were having difficulty with some of the cutting, and sometimes pictures can not be very good, but I really don't want to go into a whole lot of detail on how to sew the blocks into the quilts. And then she has so many other projects in the books that are just wonderful, so I really recommend that you get the book. So now we want to work with the 4 patch posy blocks. And the nice thing about the squares is that since they're all cut on the straight of grain, you have choice of 4 different ways that you can sew these units together. So if I got that in the center, then I want to turn my block and put that on the center, turn my block 1/4 turn, put that in the center, and then turn my block 1/4 turn. So if this is here, 1 more 1/4 turn for the center. Now there is a kaleidoscope pattern developing, but I don't really like what I see. The nice thing with the squares is that you can turn everything 1/4 turn the same direction, and you'll end up with something that looks totally different. So that's one option that looks better than the one I had before, but I still have 2 more options I can try. So I'm going to try to turn everything 1/4 turn again and see if I like that one. So that's how it's looking now. It kind of looks like it's a flower in the center. I like that one too. And then we got 1 more we can make where the blue is in the middle. And I like that one as well. And so I'm looking at this through the camera lens, which is a good tool to use when you're trying to decide if something is really popping, especially when you're dealing with value. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this block together with the blue in the center. Now I always do chain piecing, so I'm always sewing onto something else. So I'm just going to take one of my triangle sections that need to be sewn. I put the one with the pin marking the straight of grain at the bottom so I don't lose it. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew one of these units together. So now I have these 2 units sewn, and then I'm going to, on this one you can actually press your seams one direction if you like. I tend to press my seams open, but we'll go ahead and press in the opposite direction. And then we'll sew these 2 units together. So because I sewed the seams to the other direction and I still want to have a nice flat center, so I'm going to have to cut my little connecting string, and then I'm actually going to take out the seam allowance up to the seam line on both sides. So then once I get the seam lines out, I can then just open this, press the center flat, so I'm pressing the center flat, and then I can turn it to the right side and press my seam allowances so that I have the little 4-patch unit in the center there. And that's how you do it. So it doesn't matter what size. As I said, the blocks that I'm currently making, I am keeping the units in half because I am actually going to make a 1-block wonder quilt, and you can look that up, but it's made with the same technique. And I don't actually sew these block units together right now. They actually are going to not have those star points that I was talking about earlier. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye for now.